let him know winter is a coming fast and colder than the last. Pity for me, cold as can be when breezes blow with ice and snow. No wonder then I sing time and again.
This is Sparky on Ice, the coldest podcast on the internet. Today is November 1st, and I've been on ice for 28 days. Well, another week has passed, and not much has happened here, really. We did get a Con 2 storm for about a day earlier this week. I think it was Tuesday, but all the days run together here, so I'm really not sure exactly what day it was. I do know it was really windy and pretty cold. The ambient temperature was around 4, but the wind chill was in the negative 30s, and visibility was only a couple hundred feet. I made a video about it on my YouTube, so you could go check that out and see what a Con 2 looks like and sounds like. And while you're there, go ahead and subscribe to get some more videos from the ice. I'm starting to do building tours as I can get to them, and I'll do a lot more scenery as the season goes on. I did one in the chapel earlier last week, and I'll probably get into both of the bars this week and give you an idea about the nightlife, as it's so called here. But back to the weather. Basically shut down most of our outside work, so everyone came in to do prep for when the weather cleared. One of the projects we're working to get done is the Spot or the South Pole Overland Traverse. This is a team that takes the sled trains to South Pole Station and several remote field camps. Most of their trips are mostly huge bladders filled with fuel to get the stations through next year. But this year we don't have any of the LC-130 Hercules to supplement them with regular supply drops. So they have to add on a few more trailers to carry more stuff down this year. And that means more electrical connections. These aren't just your regular cord and plug connections. These carry a fair amount of current, and they have to stand up to extreme cold of the continent. So we use a specific kind of wire called SEOOW, which is code for this. The SE is extra hard service cord, thermoplastic elastomer conductor insulation and jacket. The first O is for oil resistant outer jacket. Second O is for oil resistant inner jacket on each of the conductors, and the W is for outdoor rated. And this just means that they're really, really sturdy extension cords. But ours goes one step further and is classified as polar cable. It is manufactured to remain flexible in down to negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Most other cords freeze and crack at these temperatures. Ours also has these massive plugs on the ends. Some of you may have used something similar to this on boat docks, especially if you were in the Navy or Coast Guard. They're called shore or cannon plugs. They usually have 4 pins that fit into the slots for the matching receptacle. I think the closest thing most people may recognize is a charging station for the electric vehicles, only about 3 times bigger and made of steel or aluminum. So we set up these cables and ends for Spot and got everything installed, which is good because they're leaving Wednesday. Well, the day after the Con 2, the weather broke and it became like summer around here. Hardly any wind, temps in the teens and 20s. The sun came out and began to melt layers of ice and snow on the ground. Oddly enough, this is the time that I break out my traction devices. I've learned that this is one of the most dangerous times for slipping on ice, and there are 2 major reasons for this. We tend to be less cautious when we see spots of brown instead of all white. People think it's not slippery, but fail to see the small section of ice that hasn't melted yet. And the ice will melt in the sun, but if the water hasn't evaporated by the time a cloud goes over or the wind picks up, it turns into a very slick and almost invisible layer of ice. And I'm not about to take any chances with my history of knee problems. Yeah, so I wear my traction devices. We also got a batch of new folks this week. I think we had 60-ish people, so we're around 435. Good news is about 40 of those people will be heading to the pole in a week once the Basslers and Twin Otters arrive on station. Honestly, I didn't notice a difference in the number of people I see. I did get to see some familiar faces from last year that made it in on this flight. It is nice to see people I met last year. It makes the place feel more inviting than it has been so far this year with the limited people. Not to say it isn't nice in general. I certainly know a lot more people and interact with them more than I did last year. Some people are actually getting my name right this time. Usually it takes people to realize my first name is not Ray. And we are still in yellow, so we can't do anything fun. But I have decided to take up a new hobby. I'm going to learn to play the bass. I have a friend who plays, and he is going to teach me some basics, and is only going to cost me a bottle of whiskey. Pretty good deal since I never use my alcohol rations anyway, and I hope to be able to play pretty well by the time I leave this year. I also have my D&D going strong, which we had a really fun lesson last week, and one of the funniest things happens that's happened in a game in a while. One of the players is new, and he's playing a sorcerer. Well, in the campaign we were in, there was an orchard, so he wanted to buy a basket of apples. I figured, what could it hurt? So I let him. Well, fast forward to a semi-critical battle with some local thugs. He looks at me and asked about using objects as thrown weapons. I'm thinking chair, table leg, something like that. Standard improvised weapons. Nope, he wants to throw an apple. I'm like, sure, I guess you could throw an apple. Bam, natural 20. He does 2 hit points to one of the thugs, who happened to only have 2 hit points left anyway. Death by apple. I described the death as a hit directly on the bridge of his nose, sending bone pieces into his brain. Yeah. So now they call him the apple source. And he used that tactic a few more times, but with far less effect. Still pretty funny on the whole that sorcerer decides to throw an apple. Yeah. So I did get some questions, and 3 of them come from Carrie, so I'll answer them. Question 1, how is the food this year? It's pretty much the same as last year. It's pretty good most of the time, but we still have Taco Tuesday and Cajun Wednesdays, and and I generally avoid spicy foods, but being here I sometimes have to eat it. Like last week they made steak with peppercorns on it, and I'm not going to turn down steak, so I just had to tough it out and scrape off peppercorns as I found them. It wasn't horrible. I survived. The biggest issue here is the desserts. The baker here is amazing, and some of her cookies and cakes are really delicious, and I really need to be careful with those. We have a thing called the Freshman 15, and I'm pushing it. Question 2, what are all the animals that live there, and which ones have you seen so far? So there are different types of animals that migrate here. None of them actually live here. We have emperor penguins, Adelie penguins, leopard seals, Weddell seals, and skuas. This time of year, the leopard seals are about the only thing around, and they're generally giving birth on the ice. And they look like large, dark lumps of, I don't know what to call them, slugs on the ice shelf. They don't move too much, but you can look out there and you can definitely see that they're big seals. Later on, we get all the others. Probably in about a month, the skua will show back up, and the penguins will show up not too long after that. And then once the ice breaks, generally in January, we'll get the orcas and humpback whales because they'll come in and start hunting. I should probably explain what a skua is. So imagine a large, very aggressive, and intelligent seagull. And they are experts at knowing if you have food and will dive bomb you and make you drop it. So we are constantly on watch out for skua. Question 3, what do you personally like about Antarctica, and why do you think anyone wants to work and or live there? That is really hard to say. I like a lot of things about here. I like the weather. Yes, it's cold, but as we say here, it's a dry cold, not the wet, bone-chilling winters we have back in the Northwest. I like my job. It's fulfilling and always a challenge. I like having a job that uses many of the things I've learned over the years, and not just my job. My experience with podcasting helped me be better at the mixer for karaoke in the radio booth. This place makes being a jack of all trades a high value set of skills. The more you can do, the better your experience here is. I like to consider myself fairly resourceful when it comes to getting things done, and that is a huge benefit here when we generally have to make things work with what we have available. As for why anyone wants to work or live here, that is even harder to say. Each person has a different reason. Some people love the adventurous life and see this as a checkbox on their bucket list. Others, just want to get away from the world for a while. For me, I like to feel useful, and this place certainly makes me feel useful. And the money isn't bad. But honestly, if I could find a job doing what I do here back in the States, I would much rather be doing that. This place is amazing, but it's not home. Okay, so that's questions. Let's get on to some history. I know I said I'd be doing Mawson's trip to the magnetic pole, but I think I covered that pretty well in the last episode. So next one will be Roald Admundson's trip in 1910. Roald Admundson was an intrepid polar traveler, having been on the Belgian Antarctic expedition in 1897 and was the first to sail the Northwest Passage in the Arctic. He had planned a trip for the North Pole and was nearly ready when Cook and Parry announced they had reached it in 1909. So Admundson changed his goal to the South Pole. His ship, the Fram, was designed and built for polar travel. It was round-bottomed and about a third as wide as it was long. The idea that it was immune to the perils of being stuck in pack ice. Other ships stuck in the pack would sometimes succumb to the immense pressures on them and be crushed, leaving the occupants stranded or floating on ice with no ship. The Fram was different in that it would respond to the sideways pressure by being pushed upwards, rising out of the pack to sit on the ice. The Fram left Christina, Norway on August 1910 with provisions for 2 years and nearly 100 Greenland sled dogs. That would be the key to his team's success in reaching the South Pole ahead of Scott, who was heading for the pole at the same time. Only the ship's commander, Thorvald Nilsen, had known Admundson's plan to go south in the weeks preceding sailing. As far as everyone else was concerned, the plan was still to go north and complete what was described as a largely scientific voyage. On the eve of Fram's departure, another 2 crew members were also informed, but the rest were not informed for a full month once they discovered they were sailing south instead of north. The Fram reached Antarctica and landfall at the Bay of Whales on January 14, 1911, where the winter base was established. Scott's ship, the Terra Nova, met the Fram here. Scott was not on board on February 3, 1911, to the surprise of Scott's crew, who didn't expect to see them there at all. Admundson's diary from this period shows that he was very concerned that Scott would beat him to the pole. While Scott had a team of scientists and a full scientific program, Admundson's sole purpose was to be the South Pole first. If he didn't do this, his expedition would have been a failure. Contemporary etiquette among explorers was that Admundson should not have been in the area at the time he went there and into competition with Scott because of his own financial needs. For his part, Scott writes that he will not change his itinerary of his attempt, and the pole was the basis of Admundson's largely unknown timings, and the concept of the race to the pole was entirely Admundson's making. Admundson's men set about laying depots until the sun disappeared for the winter in late April. After this, without a scientific program to keep them occupied, they were given jobs to prepare for the sled journey to the pole in the coming spring. For several months to wait, every detail could be thought out carefully and repeatedly, and all equipment readied as thoroughly as possible. Admundson had endured a difficult enforced winter over 10 years beforehand and understood the importance of preparation and maintaining spirits, particularly during the period of 24 hours darkness in the polar night. By the time the winter was ending, the teams were fully prepared and ready to go. The only criteria for Admundson's success would be the first to the pole. Being second would have meant failure, and he had no other reason for being to Antarctica. He knew he could leave earlier than Scott because he was using dogs rather than ponies for his transport, and they were more cold-hardy. Driven by this requirement to make his journey as early as possible, Admundson decided to leave for the pole on the 8th of September with 8 men with sledges, pulled by 86 dogs, though against the advice of his highly experienced men who traveled with Nansen on 2 expeditions. Johnson said that it was too early in the season and it would be too cold. For the first 2 days, they made good progress, but the third, the temperature dropped to negative 70 Fahrenheit. Men and dogs suffered miserably, and they went on for another day and built an igloo that night, but then Admundson decided to turn back, and the men had gotten frostbite in their sleep, and several dogs froze to death. Admundson's second attempt to reach the pole began on October 19, 1911, leaving with 5 men and 4 sledges, each pulled by 13 dogs, for a total of 52. They made good progress feeding the dogs on seal meat and blubber that had been brought with them. The men's rations were meager in quality but sufficient in quantity. Admundson avoided Scott's route to the polar plateau of Beardmore Glacier, and instead ascending the steeper, more difficult but direct route up the small glacier he named Axel Heiberg, one of his financial backers. 7 dogs died on the ice barrier before reaching the glacier, and all but 18 were killed at the top of the glacier. Those killed were eaten by the dogs and men alike, and some were depoted for the return journey. At 3 p.m., Friday, December 14, 1911, the party arrived at the South Pole. Scott had not beaten them, and they erected a small tent and placed it inside a letter to the King of Norway asking Scott to send it. In part mindful of the controversy surrounding the claims of Cook and Parry to have reached the North Pole, Amundsen wanted to be no doubt that he had indeed reached the South Pole, which was a point of a featureless flat plateau. For the next few days, the team took navigational readings at different times of the day and traveled out from the pole along headings of 90 degrees to each other for a few miles to ensure they had reached the South Pole. Best proof was that Scott corroborated their navigational readings by arriving to the same point, took pictures of the Norwegians' tent, and brought back letters and equipment left there. They left the pole on 18th of December and arrived back at the frame 25th of January, 1912, just 38 days after leaving the South Pole and 99 days in all, 10 less than anticipated. They had covered 1,860 nautical miles, 5 men and 52 dogs to set off, 5 men and 11 dogs return. Those 11 surviving dogs would later be given to Douglas Mawson for his Australasian Antarctic expedition when they met each other in Hobart in March of 1912. So that is the Admundson Scott, the first person to reach the South Pole. Next week, we're going to cover the Scott expedition, which was going on at the same time. I do know that Scott expedition went through a whole lot more troubles, so we may get into a little more detail with that one. If you have any questions for me, you can always contact me on Facebook or Twitter or my new Reddit account, or drop a line on the YouTube channel. I'll try and answer those as best I can. So until next week, stay warm.
I feel the snow and sleet without a pair